Welcome everybody. Today I'm going to be walking through what causes suicidal thoughts, where they originate from, why they become more severe, and then how to get rid of them. So if you've dealt either with suicidal thoughts or tendencies these days, or if you've ever dealt with it in the past, this will be a very, very informative little lesson for you. If you don't know who I am, my name is Hicks. I'm a mental health coach, founder of mentalhealthcoaching.com and the SSS conditioning method. I used to be suicidal, had a plan to take my life many years ago, and thankfully that got interrupted. And I tried the traditional routes of therapy, medications, different coping mechanisms. None of that really worked really well for me, but I knew there had to be a way to be able to live without depression, and I learned how to do that through learning how to train the brain. And that's what I help people learn how to do, typically in about 90 days or so. And today I really want to do a deep dive on a subject that is very near and dear to me, which is suicidal depression. It is something that very few people truly understand, even though it is actually deceptively simple in terms of where it comes from and what causes it. And I think that the framework that I've refined over the years is the most comprehensive framework I've ever seen in the mental health industry to really help people understand why they're feeling suicidal, and then how to get themselves back to a more depression-free lifestyle. So first thing I want to point out is if you are feeling like you have a plan, or you have, you're having suicidal thoughts, the most important thing you can and should do is get some type of help right away. If you feel like you have an active plan to harm yourself, you need to immediately call emergency services for sure. There are different levels to suicidal ideation. The most extreme would be you have a plan thought out and developed, and it's there. That's the time when you absolutely need to get help immediately, as in like today. The sort of second tier from that is when you've been contemplating it for a while, maybe thinking about ways that you might want to do it, but you don't have a concrete plan to do it. Also still, of course, important that you get help right away. And then there are a couple layers of severity, but beyond that, where there's kind of general ideation. People will have, suicidal thoughts. And in fact, a lot of people who are feeling depressed have suicidal thoughts, even though they have no intention to harm themselves. And if you've ever felt depressed of any nature, there's a very high likelihood that you have had at least one or two suicidal thoughts. And a lot of people get very scared by this because they do want to live. They want to improve their mental health. They want to improve their life. And the suicidal thoughts almost seem like they come in to the mind out of nowhere. And they go, oh my gosh, why am I even thinking like that? So you may have had that experience as well too. And so if you're feeling like that is maybe the stage that you are experiencing, then it's good that you're catching this fairly early, because the sooner you catch it, the more you can keep it from snowballing. There's also the initial layer. So the most extreme layer would be you have a plan. A layer beyond that would be you're contemplating a plan. A layer beyond that would be you're having the repetitive thoughts, about maybe doing something, right? And then beyond that would be you don't want to harm yourself, but the thoughts are continuously popping up. And then the most modest layer I've seen of suicidal type thinking is when people will sometimes have an intrusive thought where it's not necessarily them harming themselves, but they might imagine like, gosh, if I could just not wake up in the morning, that would be great, right? And then they'll go, oh gosh, I don't know if that's not really what I mean. I don't want to abandon my son and my daughter, right? But that thought came out of nowhere. So if you've ever felt scared as to why you're having thoughts like that, I want to help you understand where this is coming from. So there's a training I put together a while back, and we call it the formula for fulfillment. And I'll give you a quick reminder on the formula for fulfillment. The formula for fulfillment is life experience or life circumstance equals expectations. Okay, a different way to say that would be your current life, if it matches your beliefs about how your life should be, then you will generally feel fulfilled and feel peace of mind. And you can look at this at a macro level, like your life on the whole, or you can look at this at a more micro level, like different areas of your life. So for example, a lot of times people are very fulfilled with one area of their life, but very unfulfilled with another area. A common area people tend to focus a lot on would be their career, for example, and they can end up being a little more fulfilled because that area is something that they have more control over, maybe, and they feel like they're able to, say, be very successful and they're meeting all of their core expectations. But very often people who are fulfilled in their career are unfulfilled in their marriage, for example, or vice versa. And so if you just think about an area of your life that you are unfulfilled with right now, chances are there are significant expectations that you have that are not being met. So think of it like the scales of justice, where you've got expectations on one side and then your life experience on the other. So if you have really high expectations, right, you have a lot of expectations weighing that down, then, and your life experience does not match that, there's going to be a big imbalance. So the size of the imbalance in the equation determines how upset you are going to be. Total balance, right, equilibrium, would create feelings of, say, acceptance, peace, contentedness, things of that nature. When it goes in the opposite direction, right, when your life experience is better than your expectations, we feel very thrilled, very overjoyed, excited. When our life experience is a lot worse than we expected, then we'll start to feel things like depressed, stressed, anxious, things like that. Okay? So where do suicidal thoughts come in? Well, where suicidal thoughts come in are when that disconnect becomes significant enough where it's substantially painful, and when we believe that there is no way to reconcile the equation. So a simple little game, or not a game, excuse me, a simple metaphor I like to use is a game. So if you think about playing a board game, for example, if I had you play a board game and the only way you could win the board game was to, let's say, accomplish 5 specific objectives, and you have to accomplish them in a particular order, so 1 through 5. But in order to do that, you have to follow a huge, giant list of rules. Well, it's going to become very frustrating for you to try to win that game, right? As you try to play that game and you try to take action in order to score points, you're going to find that you end up getting a conflict with lots of rules. Lots of rules are going to get in the way and keep you from being able to score. If the rules make it sufficiently challenging where you start to feel like there is no way for you to win that game, then you're going to no longer want to play that game. And in fact, all of us have probably had this experience where we either play a board game or a video game or a sport, and we just cannot seem how to score or win or get any points. It does not create the sensation for the majority of us of wanting to continue. It creates the sensation of, I am experiencing repetitive pain the more I continue to try, and it is my biological imperative to avoid pain, so I am now going to do what only makes sense, which is quit the game, right? So what happens is we all are, in essence, playing our own game of life, the game of life. And we have a certain set of rules that we are trying to follow. So where suicidal thoughts come in is when people are trying to play the game of life using a set of rules that makes it feel like it is impossible to win. So I'll give you a couple examples. These are real examples, but of course I'm going to keep the details anonymous. I could use one from my own personal life because of course I was suicidal. I'll tell you when I was in my teens, I'll just tell you mine real quick. My big problem was my home environment. I love my mother and stepfather dearly. They're great people. At that time, it was a particularly challenging time for our family. There was a ton of arguing. There was a lot of tension. There was a lot of stress in the environment. And as a teenager, it got a little scary sometimes for me, and it just became very overwhelming. When there's just arguments happening almost every day is what it felt like, and it seemed like an untenable thing. And the story I had created in my mind is, I cannot handle this, right? So I was creating a belief of I can't deal with the way it currently is. So created a big disconnect. This is how my life is. My parents are going through a tough time. I was not very sensitive to the tough time they were going through for a variety of reasons at the time. Most teenagers are not. All I knew was There was a lot of anger and stress and argument between them and me. And so I just, the simple story I created is I cannot and will not stay another X number of years in this home environment. I cannot do it. So that was my life circumstances. And then this was my expectations, huge mismatch. And the story I created is I cannot do it. I will not, and I cannot do it. So because of that expectation that I had put on it, it made it where I thought the only way I'm going to be able to escape is I got to take my own life, right? Because I didn't see that there was another viable alternative, right? And this is what happens for people. So that's one from my own story. There was a client I had recently who, very, very amazing man, great big heart, fantastic guy. And he had kind of fallen for this girl, was very interested in her. He was, trying to bend over backwards to make her happy and please her. She expressed interest in him romantically as well. And then come to find out, she had some very strong beliefs about him for some very unfair reasons, about his race in particular. And so she had a set of beliefs of, I can't be with you because of your race. So in his head, his model of the world, his set of beliefs, his set of expectations was that he had to do every single thing in his power in order to make her happy and to please her and make her interested in him. And if she was not interested in him, that it was his fault. So he had a set of expectations of, she must be interested in me, right? She must be, or else it's my fault and there's something wrong with me. And unfortunately, it just mismatched with life expectations, right? Life circumstances, because she just came from a different model of the world and had a different set of beliefs. And so they were completely misaligned romantically. It was completely incompatible. But his expectations, his beliefs was it must be compatible, right? And so that constant tension of trying to make the relationship work and try to get her to, respond to him differently was driving him nuts. And it made him have some suicidal thoughts. He didn't want to kill himself. He didn't, and he still doesn't. He doesn't want to take his life, but his mind, our mind has a biological imperative to try to avoid pain. And so many mental health problems originate because our mind is producing this incessant stream of intrusive thoughts to try to avoid the pain that we believe we're going to experience. So when we have created a set of beliefs that makes this giant mismatch, our brain wants to avoid that pain. And so it will try to come up with a way to avoid the pain, even if it is literally taking our own lives. So that's where that comes from. Okay. Another example that I want to mention is a woman I had worked with, and this is a common thing. This happens for tons and tons of people, so it's not really even that specific to her. Again, very amazing woman, big heart, fantastic lady. And she had spent her whole life trying to be essentially a people pleaser, right? She wanted to always make sure she had people's approval. She wanted to make sure that people were pleased, in particular her parents and in particular her mom. And she was continuously putting herself out there and sacrificing herself in ways that were unsustainable, that were creating an unhealthy environment for her in her own life. So she was caught between, I must get my mother's approval, yet in order to do what I need to do to get my mother's approval, that's going to be incredibly painful because her mom had very, very high expectations. And so she created this big dichotomy of, I either am going to have to get her approval, I must get her approval, yet I simultaneously can't get her approval. And so therefore there's a huge untenable mismatch between life experience and expectations, and then her mind was creating suicidal thoughts. So this is what will happen. And so the name of the game to reduce and eliminate suicidal thoughts is we have to balance the equation. We first have to start to make more progress at making them equate themselves. And then eventually we have to make sure that there is as much of a symmetry between them as possible. And there are several strategies that can be done to do that. One way to do that is wherever it makes sense, we can change the life circumstances. So, for example, one common set of expectations that causes people a lot of pain is they want to be married and they want to have children. So if someone isn't married and doesn't have children, they will tend to feel maybe sad or depressed. And if they feel like they've tried and failed many times, they will start to feel very upset. And so, of course, there's different strategies that can be done. Maybe they were selecting the wrong type of partner. Maybe there needs to be some type of a fertility treatment. So the first thing that we want to do whenever possible is try to expand our options of choices. Not everybody has access to the same choices, but we tend to psychologically believe that we have fewer choices than we actually do. So the first thing we want to do is create a vision of how do you really want it to be, and figure out, are there strategies that you can put in place to make it the way that you want it to be, right? And there almost always are. And this is why I love my career so much, because I'm able to help people find those strategies. We know that there are strategies, the ones that we have solutions for are for people with their finances, for people with their relationships, and then certainly with their emotions, because those are the three biggest areas that cause people stress typically. So we tend to create solutions for those. So whenever possible, you want to focus on balancing that part of the equation. However, we sometimes will have a set of beliefs and expectations that it creates a completely unhealthy view of how things are supposed to be. And very often we are completely unaware of what those expectations are. So a common one is when someone grew up in an environment where they felt like they were constantly critiqued and judged by a parent figure, and that it felt like there was almost nothing they could ever do in order to satisfy their parent. That would be someone who would tend to develop a perfectionist type of model of the world, where they think they have to find every flaw and account for every flaw before somebody else sees it. And so they are trying to win the game of life by trying to accomplish an unwinnable goal, which is be perfect. So that's the type of person who's going to drive themselves nuts by trying to check every single box. And depending on how big of a disconnect there is between the boxes they feel like they have to check and the boxes they are actually able to check, they may end up having suicidal thoughts. Also, just from the sheer exhaustion of trying to win that game again and again and again, right? It becomes painful and we want to check out. Another common one is people who are trying to fulfill a model of the world of being a big achiever, right? And being like the best and being number one. Another one is being a caretaker, right? So some people grew up in an environment where they got reinforced for taking care of their parents or taking care of their siblings. And so now they take everybody else's problems onto themselves. And so they never feel good enough about themselves unless everybody else is doing what they're supposed to do and everybody else feels good. Well, imagine trying to play a board game where the only way you win that board game is if all the other players do what they're supposed to do. That's going to be a very frustrating board game and you're very unlikely to win. Okay, so those are a lot of the common ones. So the only way suicidal thoughts occur, if you know someone who's suicidal, if you ever encounter someone who is suicidal, what I hope is that this video can help save someone. If I can get this video out there and I can either, someone who's feeling suicidal thoughts can see this and better understand their situation, to talk to you guys, what I would want you to know is I would want you to know that this problem is solvable. And I know that when when you're feeling depressed and suicidal, that's the last thing you want to hear from somebody who's not living your life, because it feels so unfair to say that. But what I mean there is, whatever the problem is that you're dealing with, it is solvable, but maybe not in the way that you thought, right? When people talk to people who are suicidal and they say, hey, cheer up, it's all okay, it's all going to get better. Suicidal people tend to brush that off and say, you don't understand. And the reason why suicidal people brush that off and say you don't understand is because the suicidal person is so into their own beliefs and expectations about how it has to be and how it has to go. And what the suicidal person is really saying is, you don't get it because my life will never match my expectations. That's really what the situation is. But the way that the person who's suicidal will experience it is they don't even realize it's their own subjective expectations that are making them feel the pain. All they will know is that their life is dramatically different than how they think it is supposed to be. And so they get so fixated on what they dislike about their life or about themselves that they don't realize there's two sides of this equation. So a lot of times people become suicidal because they're only thinking about the life circumstances, and they're thinking, well, there's no way to make the life circumstances match my expectations, so therefore I have to kill myself, right? The thing is, sometimes your life circumstances are changeable. And our human mind, when we get in a fearful place, will create tunnel vision where we do not perceive all of the choices that we have available. We'll start to think that the only way that we can get out is this particular path, right? And that's just not the case. It's a survival mechanism. When we get in a fearful mode, our brain shuts down and zeroes in on less and less and less. So there may be strategies. If you are in a financial hole, there are strategies to climb out of that hole. You just might need some coaching or some help or some implementation. Okay? If you're dealing with a relationship problem, there are so many strategies to improve relationships. And you might feel like you've tried everything, but what most people do is they just try the same repetitive pattern or the same 2 or 3 things again and again and again. And then we claim, oh, I tried everything. No, you didn't try everything. You just did what you know. You might need more information. You might need a new strategy. You might need new help, and that's okay. And anyway, so whatever problem you're dealing with, if it is your life circumstances, there almost always is a solution to it. And there is a solution to the suicidal thoughts, even if what you're wanting is absolutely not obtainable, right? Like if you're a 55-year-old woman and you want to have a biological child of your own, and you saved none of your eggs, and there's no possibility for that to take place, then yeah, we may not be able to accommodate by changing your life conditions to totally match that. But there are so many strategies you can use to adjust your model of the world, and this is where coaching becomes a very valuable thing for those people who need it, to make sure that we can understand what are the beliefs that are really causing you pain and how do we dismantle those or update those. And it's not as simple as like, oh, well, just forget about that. You're never going to have kids of your own, right? It's not as simple as that. But there are things you can do to truly shift and transform the way that you see and look at the world. But you do need the appropriate help to make sure that that happens. So that's what I mean by it's solvable. So if you're having suicidal thoughts, and you're kind of on that lower end of severity of the spectrum, I just want you to know it's understandable. We've all been there. I don't think there's probably many human beings alive who have never had a suicidal thought. I think it's all happened to us at least once or twice. And it's okay. If you are on that spectrum of suicidal thoughts, you just need to rectify it. You've got to balance this equation. If you feel like you can easily identify what the mismatch is and you know how to balance that, then just work on balancing that. If you feel like you're having a tough time figuring out how to balance it, that's where you're going to need to get some help of some kind from somebody. That doesn't necessarily have to be someone like me. It could be a therapist. It could maybe a family member or a friend, right? But having a more skilled person tends to make it a lot easier because they can help identify what the problem is. But you got to balance that equation somehow, some way. Okay. For those of you who are watching this and you're trying to support somebody who's feeling suicidal, just to help you understand what causes it is going to be a huge benefit, because what you can do is you're listening to people who are suicidal is you can try to uncover what is the expectation they have that they feel is unmeetable. And you really want to err on the side of trying to listen as much as possible first, because suicidal people have a large tendency to feel misunderstood right away. And if you just come in hot and heavy with recommendations and suggestions, chances are they're not going to feel like you really understand. But if you take the time to really understand and you really try to get, like, what is their model of the world? What are the expectations they have that are not being met? Then you can better help guide them and help them shift their beliefs. You can ask them a new question. You can get them to see something differently. So let me kind of close with this. If you remember the game, okay, we're already here. This is already a longer video than I thought it would be. I might as well take this all the way fully home. Let's dive a little bit deeper on this. So let's talk, if we look at your board game, here's a simple thing you want to be looking for, okay? Whether you are a suicidal person or you're supporting somebody, here's a way to kind of identify the challenges. some people, we all are after a particular goal of the game, right? I gave you some examples of that. Trying to be perfect, trying to be the best, trying to, take care of everybody. Those are some, common examples. So you first want to identify what is the value, is the term that we use for it. What are you valuing? What are you trying to feel that may be impossible to feel? Okay, the most common ones I deal with from an anxiety standpoint with my clients are people are trying to chase down safety and security is a big one. And then on, the other examples I gave you before are common ones for depression. So sometimes people are trying to chase down something that's just not obtainable. And that's one of the first things you want to be paying attention to. The second thing you want to be looking to is not just the values, but what are their rules? Okay, rules are beliefs that we have about what we think has to happen in order for us to feel that our values are properly met. So for example, some people will be chasing after the value of being good enough. And so when I ask them, well, what has to happen in order for you to feel good enough? They will then have a big long list like, oh, I got to make this amount of money, and my spouse has to do this, and I got to do this, and my parents have to do this, and my friends have to do this, and I got to, get this promotion at work, and da 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 da. And they'll have a huge long list sometimes of things that are unreasonable, right? So those two forces are what you want to be looking for. What are you chasing after, and is it obtainable? And then what are the rules? What are the expectations that you have about what has to happen in order for you to feel that you've accomplished that you've gotten that? Okay. And again, with my clients, I take them through a full 3-hour values clarification thing that we call it, where I help them uncover their old way of looking at the world, all of their rules that are a problem, and those types of things. So if you ever feel like you want some help, reach out to us at mentalhealthcoaching.com. But for now, that should at least give you the main gist to be looking out for. So if you're feeling suicidal, or you know somebody who's suicidal, my heart goes out to you. I've been there. And there is a way out. There is. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm just saying it's possible. And it's definitely easier in the long run than continuing to feel the way that you are. And it is a whole lot easier than making an unchangeable choice that's going to impact the people that you love. Because no matter how suicidal you're feeling, I know that you have people who care about you, that you care about too, and you do not want to put them in pain. And so the only thing that's causing you to contemplate that is that you think that the only way to escape the pain is you have only one choice, and you have lots of other choices. We will tend to make ourselves feel even more depressed and disempowered when we convince ourselves we have fewer choices than we do. And you have lots and lots of choices. So if you need some help, again, reach out to us at mentalhealthcoaching.com. We offer one free coaching session to anybody in our community. We'd love to help you. But of course, if you are dealing with a severe case of suicidal thoughts and you need help immediately, you need to call emergency services right away. And if you know of somebody who has a plan, of course, you need to call emergency services. If you know of somebody who's simply having ideation, you need to focus on getting them help as quickly as you can, in whatever format that you can. So please let us know if you have comments or questions. We want to support you. We want to support our community. Every person on the planet deserves to live depression-free. It is possible. You just got to learn what causes us to feel this way, and how do you learn the skills necessary to get the mental health that you really deserve. So thanks for your attention. Thanks for showing up. And I'll be excited to serve you in our next training. Talk to you guys soon. See ya.